Hi all you cool cats and kittens. The question I had recently was to talk more about Buddhist cosmology. And I just finished this book last night, so I guess I know all there is to know about Buddhist cosmology. Now this is the kind of book I'm reluctant to recommend broadly to people who might be viewing this channel. Not because it's bad, it's actually pretty good, but it's scholarship. It's Buddhist scholarship, which looks at Buddhism in a historical context and the myths and different things about it. And I don't know much about Akira Sadaka, but I do know Hajime Nakamura, who wrote the foreword. Akira Sadaka is the person who wrote the book. Hajime Nakamura is a well-renowned Buddhist scholar in Japan. I think he's passed away since then, or whatever, sometime. But he was well-renowned, and I trust his work. But this is kind of written from the point of view of somebody who doesn't really understand Buddhism, but understands a lot about its history and mythology, and has read a lot and has a lot of knowledge. Another really good source for learning about Buddhist cosmology that I'll just tout right here is our very own Dave Cuomo from the Angel City Zen Center gave a talk called Blinding Darkness. The theme of the talk was Buddhist creation myths. And the sort of standard line you'll hear from, Wikipedia or whoever gives you just general information about Buddhism is that Buddhism has no creation myths. Actually, I haven't looked this up on Wikipedia, but I've seen books and things that'll say that. And that's sort of true and sort of not. There is a very famous story in which Buddha is asked about the origin of the world and where things are going and, how it all began and what's the general structure of the universe. And he refuses to talk about it, saying that these kinds of talks don't lead to the cessation of suffering, and that's what he's really all about. Well, as Dave points out in his talk, that's one part of the story, but there's other parts of the story in which Buddha he rambles on, at least, according to these latter-day disciples who recorded his talks 2 centuries after he gave them, based on an oral tradition. He talks a lot about creation and how things started and all that. And so that's kind of the foundational sort of cosmology you have. Now, the thing that interested me initially in Buddhist cosmology when I first got, into this stuff, when I first started learning about it, was the ideas of heavens and hells in Buddhism. Because I'd grown up with the sort of a standard issue Christian version in which God created 3 places, heaven, hell, and earth, right? And the earth is a testing ground where he sends each new soul to get tested, to see how they do, and after they die, they either get sent forever and ever to heaven or forever and ever to hell. And heaven is really great and hell is really awful. Well, that doesn't seem very fair. What if one person is like one, toke over the line, one masturbation session over the line and he gets sent to hell forever, whereas somebody who just, got interrupted when he was trying to masturbate that, on a different day ends up on the right, number of sins that he gets to go to heaven forever. That's just ridiculous. And I'm being facetious, but this idea that you can kind of decide that very quickly just doesn't make any sense to me. The Buddhists have a whole other thing. Like, here's one example from the book of a diagram of the various hells. So there's not just one heaven and one hell. There's multiple heavens and multiple hells, and the Saha world, this world, sits somewhere in between them, and it's usually considered by most Buddhists to be the best place to go. So it's better to be born in this world than it is to be born in one of the highest heavens, and certainly better than in the deepest hells. And then you got stuff like this that goes into the dwellers, the different kind of creatures and beings that dwell in the various hells, and how big the various hells are, and where they're located, and how long a lifespan is there, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's very, very detailed and elaborate and much more interesting. And when I first learned about this stuff, which I didn't get a whole lot of detail when I first started, it seemed at least a little bit more fair, that you're just reborn into these different places, and you don't just get one chance. But still, as a matter of belief, I didn't really believe in them. But one of the great things about Buddhism, especially if you go into Dogen's Buddhism, is what he calls deep belief in cause and effect. Now, this is very attractive to people who have a kind of materialistic scientific outlook because it acknowledges the scientific method. The scientific method is basically the study of cause and effect as it operates in the material world. And Buddhism is totally down with that. It says that cause and effect in the material world is a real thing. It doesn't accept the idea of miracles, that just happen out of nowhere with no cause. So that's a great thing, but the aspect that rankles people who have a kind of materialistic, scientific, mechanistic worldview is that there is an ethical aspect to cause and effect when Buddhists talk about it. So cause and effect isn't just random things that happen because other things happen. Action creates reaction and force and all this stuff, and torque and I don't know what else they talk about in science. But there's also an ethical aspect, so that if you do an unethical action, you will receive a sort of, I don't want to say punishment, but you'll receive a bad effect from that action. And by the way, being born in heaven is not necessarily considered by the Buddhists to be something that happens as a result of good actions. You can be reborn in heaven because of bad actions, because heaven is a place where you become trapped by pleasures and the ability to fulfill desires, and it will eventually send you to hell. So the highest heaven leads you only one place, which is back into hell, because you won't have the wherewithal to do the sort of practices that are necessary to kind of get out of this wheel of cause and effect and so on and so forth. Now, whether you believe this or not is kind of up to you. It does not have to be supernatural. That's one of the things that kind of interests me about it. The sort of Buddhist conception of heaven and hell. Well, okay, see the shirt I got on today? I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. I wore this shirt to remind me to put this in because it's just wild, dumbass speculation on my part, but I thought I'd throw it in there because I thought it through and it seems sort of interesting. Which is, let's say that as most scientists, and maybe not Giorgio isn't really a scientist, but most scientists would agree that this universe is so vast and the stars and planets are so numerous that it would be a far greater surprise to find out that there were no aliens than it would be to find out that there were aliens all over the place. Like, it seems much more likely that there are all sorts of civilizations out there in space. Whether they've come and visited us or not is a whole other matter to talk about. The fact is, it's incredibly likely, like almost a certainty, that they exist, right? So, and it's almost a certainty that some alien civilizations are way more advanced than us. There must be alien civilizations out there for whom their equivalent of the year 2020 was 100,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or 100 million years ago. So a civilization like that would be indistinguishable from heaven, to our eyes, because they'd have everything solved. There'd be no disease, no war. They'd probably live for tens of thousands of years in complete comfort and blah, 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 on and on. And on the converse, there are probably worlds where it's incredibly awful to be. And if you kind of accept transmigration or reincarnation as a thing, which, that takes a little bit of a leap of faith, I think. But the idea that one could exist on, multiple places in this very universe that we can see all around us isn't too crazy, I think. The idea of reincarnation, though, is a big leap for a lot of people. And as I have said often on this YouTube channel and my books and everywhere else, I'm a bit of an agnostic when it comes to that. I would probably say that I tend towards a belief in reincarnation more than away from it, but I also studied with a teacher who, if you brought up reincarnation in front of Nishijima Roshi, he would say there's no such thing as reincarnation. When you're dead, that's it, that's all over, game over. And I can also see why he said that. And this is probably a whole other discussion of why I can hold these two things in my mind, but remember I study Dogen all the time, and Dogen just contradicts himself left and right too, so the contradictions of those two views don't bother me that much. Now, another aspect of Buddhist cosmology that I think is much more interesting than any of the stuff I've been talking about up until now is Dogen's cosmology. Now, Dogen is not that concerned with heavens and hells and states of rebirth. I mean, he references those things here and there, but he doesn't seem terribly concerned about them. The things he is concerned about, though, are things like the nature of time and the nature of space and the nature of being. And he has a very famous essay called Uji, which means being time. And in this essay, he equates being and time together as a single thing. There is no being without time. There is no time without being. And he has another essay called Koku, which is usually translated as space or empty space, in which he cites this interesting essay, or this interesting koan about two monks, or I can't remember who is the characters, but they're two Zen dudes talking, and one says, "How do you grasp empty space?" And in his answer, the other one goes like this, just grabs at the air. And the first one says, "Well, that's not how you grab empty space." So the other guy says, "Well, how do you grab empty space?" And the first guy goes, and grabs the guy's nose. Like, it's a really funny image, but he's saying that space is not something that exists apart from us and is empty. We are space. We are a manifestation of space. So we are a manifestation of the universe. And ultimately, there is only one being and one consciousness in the entire universe, and that one being and that one consciousness is you. That's where Dogen gets really weird, because this throws everything into a tizzy, this whole idea of reincarnation and heavens and hells and even other realms and stars and planets and anything you want to talk about. If you take Dogen's view of things, it all just gets thrown into the blender, and you're like, what the hell? But Dogen's view of space and time is not something he arrived at randomly. It's something that he understood through the practice of Zazen, and it's something that I think a lot of us who practice Zazen, after a while, it takes years and years of work before this starts to happen, but after a while you start to go, oh yeah, Dogen's right. Being and time are the same damn thing, and space is me, and there is this disconnect I feel between myself and the universe is a mistake I have made in my perception of things. It's actually one fused thing. And if you want to see how science fits into this, here's I haven't read this yet, but I read enough of it to kind of get the gist of where it was going. And this is not a review, I'm just saying. It's kind of an interesting idea that the universe comes from nothing, that form is emptiness and emptiness is form, just like the Buddhists say. So Buddhism doesn't deny the materialistic way of looking at things. It just says it's incomplete. So the materialistic way of looking at things is very, very useful in certain areas. If you want to figure out how to build a rocket ship to go to the moon, you're going to want to study the material aspects of the moon and the rocket ship and the person who's going to go and all this stuff. If you want to figure out how to cure a viral pandemic that's raging through the world, you'd want to study the material aspects of the virus and how it proceeds and how it spreads, and you'd kind of focus solely on that and arrive at a conclusion. But even in these things, if you're going to take the Buddhist outlook, you'd say there's other aspects of that stuff that, in order to study the material aspect completely, you kind of have to ignore the other aspects of it. and you're not getting a complete picture when you just study the material aspects of the thing. That's what I wanted to say, and I think I probably just made a huge mess out of it and just came up with something that's incredibly confusing that nobody's going to understand, but that's the thing, and I'm going to stick with it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have questions, send me an email. Or as always, I am supported by your donations via Patreon and PayPal. But at any rate, we will see you later. Have a good time all the time. Bye.